Okay, good afternoon. I think we'll try to get everybody in the room and get going.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I'll try to get going. So welcome back again. We would have, I think, enough time now this afternoon for the two panels. The morning was a bit of a rush, and so I hope that you did have good time for lunch. What would follow now is a session on China's role in global clean energy development and production. That's how we're calling it, or what we're calling it. But what we mean by that is looking both at the prospects of renewable energy use in China, the scale up of the share of the renewable energy in the energy supply mix there. But also, we will be looking at the role of China in supporting the scale up at a global level. This is something where ICTSD has been rather focused on in the past few years. It is known to some of you here in the room and to people in town that we have been advocating for a rule-based international framework that would take care specifically of issues related to international trade in renewable energy technologies. And so to that end, we have been generating a number of analytical pieces and organizing a number of policy dialogues in various parts of the world, including here in Geneva. Part of that idea is what people refer to as the Sustainable Energy Trade Initiative, which is the idea or the notion that at the bilateral level, at the regional level, at the regional cooperation level, but also ideally at the multilateral level, there would be work by governments in generating an international cooperation agreement, again rules-based, that takes care of what today is at best inadequate in terms of rules that apply to this quest for a scale-up of renewable energies, and at worst, a major gap in global governance. Those of you that work on energy issues know that we have no framework really or no platform at the global level that deals with these kind of issues. Climate change provides some guidance, and the climate change talks in the context of the UN give a bit of a platform to work towards these issues, particularly when it comes to the pursuit of low-carbon strategies for growth and development. It doesn't tell us much on what to do with respect to energy access. There's some voluntary initiatives, not least the one that has been initiated by the Secretary General of the UN by defining 2012 as the year of energy access for all. But it's based on, and I say but, because it's not sufficient, based on public-private partnerships. There's also the question, obviously, of energy security. So if we put together energy access, energy security, and the need to mitigate emissions, particularly from the energy supply sector, we have a major challenge ahead. And China has been playing a big role in manufacturing and providing some of the goods, the technologies, the services that are necessary to really confront this challenge in an effective manner. We also are aware that in the case of China and the Chinese leadership, again, and the policy there is fully conscious of that, there is the very rapid growth in emissions that has made China now a leading emitter country in the world in terms of CO2. There is also, as we were reminded this morning, very articulately by Jennifer, by others as well, obviously the challenge of providing energy to the Chinese population with the demographics and the growth and the changes that come with growth and urbanization and so on, which is, again, not a minor challenge. Finally, I would say Pascal Lamy made an emphasis this morning, which I found particularly interesting in the way that he drafted his, or crafted rather, his message on the relevance in the next 10 years of the outward investment from China. And I think that, again, when you talk about outward investment, it's just not the flow of finance that it's going to come from China, particularly for business in the rest of the world, but it's also about the Chinese companies' management, performance, methods of production, culture, entrepreneurship, that would probably be something that we will be all compelled to look at in the next 10 years attentively. So it is against that backdrop, again, that we have proposed to have this panel. We have an excellent roster of speakers this afternoon. We have invited Mr. Fang Pen to start the conversation, and I will be introducing one by one as they come to the table. Dr. Pang Feng is the Chief Executive Officer of JA Solar, which happens to be one of our sponsors this year. And JA Solar is one of the major providers of solar technologies. And again, I will let him talk about this. He has done his master's and doctoral work at the University of Minnesota and postdoctoral work at Berkeley in the U.S., and has been long associated with energy industry, including the power industry. So, Dr. Fang, you have the floor.
First page.
Yeah, you just.
Okay. First, thanks for ICTSD for inviting me to give a speech here, and also thanks Chairman and everyone here. So the title of my presentation is the development of a sustainable global PV industry. Basically, I would like to address 3 issues here. The first is mission of the solar industry from the our industry point of view, and second is basically is China's solar industry contribution to global grid parity. And just interpreting grid parity means the solar generating the power cost equivalent to the conventional energy cost. So that's the goal the PV industry or other renewable industry try to drive in. Once you reach the grid parity, means they can largely replace conventional energy. The last one, I will briefly introduce the JA Solar. So basically, you can see the currently the energy system is fossil-based energy is built in last 5 billion years. However, since the Industry Revolution in 200 years' time, we almost exhausted all the fossil-based energy. So fortunately or unfortunately, we have to change to the energy system this year. But if we, review the recent history from the energy point of view, we're thinking there are 3 distinguished, period. And the first we call is the coal energy revolution. It's happened in 1820 to 1993, before the First World War. So basically, Industry Revolution invented the engine And before that, human being consume little energy, right? So since that time, they're starting to consume a lot of energy. And the first revolution, energy revolution, is leading by Great Britain, become the largest economy and also political economic center of the world. And the second energy revolution, we think, is the oil energy revolution. And it's starting from 1914 to 1973. Basically, it's the First World War. They largely used the oil-based machine car and automobile and tanks. And then they get into the oil, petrol oil, leading the period of time. And until first, petrol crisis, oil crisis in 1973, this one is led by U.S. and also created the also largest economy and also the center of political and economic center. And then we're thinking aware or not, the third new energy revolution is the post-oil area. We're thinking is the 1973 until today. Right. So this leading by Europe and China and the U.S. That's PV is part of this revolution, we think. Also, from this page, I want to like to share with you. There was a study. It's published the cover story in Scientific American Journal in November 2009 issue. So basically, they're conducting a group of scientists in US and also global. They're conducting a feasibility study for the what is the new energy system should be or will be after this new energy transition. So they propose basically conclusion for this study is the new energy system can be established in 30 years. If the politician make a decision today, in 30 years, the human being have enough technology, manufacture capability, capital, and transfer current energy system to a new system. The new system they proposed is 45% is the wind. The figure on the left is basically 24 hours a day, right, from 0 to 24. Wind in evening is very high, so wind can generate a lot of power in the evening, and solar is in daytime, and then in between there are hydro. So proposed is 45% of solar, 45% of the wind, and then the about 10% is hydro power, which can sustain the human being for next centuries of development. Based on this study, the total PV solar were demand is more than 10,000 gigawatt. This could happen in 30 years, maybe 50 years, right? So next, I'd like to show you some pictures. Right now, people are starting to use the PV as a source of energy in large scale. This is one of the PV solar farm in Germany, and JA Solar provided a panel to that. It's built for generating 1.4 megawatt. And also the second one, this one is in Germany, is from former East Germany, the Cold War Center. They have some military airport, and right now they converted it into the PV solar farm. And also we provided the module for that. This one also showing in Germany in the winter time, the PV is generating power, and on the rooftop, on the different format. This is in Italy. This is one of the largest solar power farm. It's a 20 megawatt each, and then we provided the solar panel for that. So basically, give you some flavor. Solar starting become one of the fast-growing energy, alternative energy to conventional energy, frame. Also, in China, they are starting to largely deploy the solar energy, especially last year. the solar energy basically is leading by German government in early days, and then in Europe is leading the world. Normally, in the 2 years ago, Europe have almost 80% of marketing share globally for the PV energy. But since last couple of years, US and also China starting to open their domestic market. I think China last year installed 3 gigawatt within half year time. And this year will become number 2 or number 1 market. It's 6 to 8 gigawatt. And gradually we're migration to 10 gigawatt per year, which is very significant, almost 25% of world market. So basically, the message here is the PV starting to be utilized globally. Right? And this showing from the manufacturer sector, basically the company based in China gradually become the large percentage of the marketing share. If you look at the 2008 compared to 2011, the manufacturer sector in 2008, the German company, QCell, and First Solar, and then the China, the Suntech. Actually, the Chinese company, most of them is the Nasdaq listed. It's also, you can consider it's a Chinese company or it's a global company, right? It's not headquarter registered in most of the companies in Cayman Island, but have manufacturing facility in China and also the globally market. Right? JA Solar is one of them. And in 2008, top 12 for PV suppliers, 4 of them from China. But in 2011, from top 12 suppliers, almost 9 of them from China. So this is, you can see the industry. Basically, the manufacturing industry is very quickly shifted to China, which is due to the, I think, in the supply chain and also the cost and also the free computation of the global industry. Basically, solar, you can see there are 3 sectors around the industry chain. The upper stream is a polysilicon material. Basically, it's used the silicon sand. It's very rich material on the earth. And through the chemical process to make the polysilicon, it's a pure silicon to prepare for the solar field. So you can view it, upper stream is a chemical plant. In 2008, China taking about 11% of the global marketing share. And by 2011, it's about 1/3 of that is manufactured in China. And also in US and Germany, it's a major supplier of this sector. In the central sector, it's basically they're taking the polysilicon material and make the semiconductor wafers, and then use the semiconductor process, making the solar cell. And in 2008, almost 50% of manufacture is in China. In 2011, it's about 64%. Majority manufacture of the solar cell is coming from China today. And also downstream, basically is use the solar panels to build the solar farms. And basically it's application. And in 2008, 82% is market is from Europe. However, in the last year, I think in the it's not due to the Europe marketing shrink. It's due to global market growing very fast. So the Europe still have 70% of market share, and among that, China also grew domestic market to 9%. So that's a general picture of the PV application. And this is showing the horizontal axis is the time, this picture. The vertical axis is cumulatively installation of this PV solar farm in terms of gigawatt. As you can see, the industry in year of 2000 almost nothing, just started. The solar research R&D been 30 years, but the commercialization or industrialization is starting from German introduced the FIT system. It's called the feed-in tariff system. Basically, it's one form of subsidy. They tax the currently traditional energy system for 1 or 2 cents and use those things to encourage the PV industry to generating this power. The purpose of FIT is not permanently for government subsidy. The original thinking or design of FIT is try to use some help to commercialize this PV industry, enlarge this supply chain, and then the cost can be quickly reduced. And then it's become once they reach the grid parity, means can competing with conventional energy. So this industry can grow by itself, become a market-driven industry. I think in this policy is very successful. You can see they are growing very, very fast. And also right now is in the transition point from the government driving to a market-driving industry. And also you see the target for PV industry in the energy form is changing, is upgraded every year. Just a year ago, by 2020, the global major application, the thinking is 200 gigawatt, but just within last year time frame, they revised the 2020 goal 250 to 400% higher. So right now, people are thinking it's 500 gigawatt to 1,000 gigawatt by 2020. Means it's almost 10 times more than all the historically cumulative installation. Remember, it's 68 gigawatt, last slide is showing. So even this goal, every year will be upgraded. And that means the PV as a new energy form starting to generally accepted by the society, and also it's going to grow globally very quickly in next 10 years. And this is showing the grid parity, so-called, is around the corner. This is very important milestone. If you think about it, in 1978, use PV generating per kilowatt hour need almost $5 US. But by last year, today 2011, and only need slightly less than 20 US cents you can generate in a kilowatt hour, which is already used in some and reached in some country, so-called user side grid parity. And also is slightly lower than retail natural gas electricity. And this trend will continue. By 2015, worldwide, the PV generating power will be largely competitive to the conventional energy. So the grid parity basically is on the way. And also the solar is very resourceful. So right now, if 1 hour's solar, the sunshine to the earth is equivalent to globally energy consumption a year. So we have a lot of resources. That's why this morning I mentioned to the planning research professors, their assumption of energy is limited. It's based on the traditional energy. If you look at this new available energy, there are a lot of opportunities over there. And also this showing the PV industry driving motivation. The early days from 1990, the first group of PV users basically is environmental idealist. They not care of the cost. They just try to demonstrating there's new energy. But since the year of 2000, the German FIT published, and then the investor come in. They want to making money. The driving force become making money. So that's drive the first wave of growth of the industry. And the next wave is coming is after reach the grid parity. And the third wave is coming. And the third wave is much larger in scale. And also the industry will develop to a much, much larger, will be the $1 trillion industry. It's much larger than the semiconductor or other industry, maybe become one of the largest industry globally. That's why people is very, very exciting about this. And this is showing the in China also more than half of China's area has reached the PV grid parity, which is due to the contribution globally, and also 60% right now is due to manufacture in China, which can reduce, we said, the CO2 or environmental contamination, or all of these things. This were provided a basis and provided the power to do that. Also, we heard a lot of the anti-dumping happening in U.S. and also in Europe, and also a lot of trade conflict is happening, right? Without thinking the the cause, but if only from PV industry point of view, they not quickly price driving down in last few years, is people want to reach grid parity, and due to the material or supply chain cost reduction last few years, basically the cost is reduced almost 400% in last 4 years, which make the industry possible for globally use. So average growth of the industry in last 10 years is almost 45% a year cumulatively. And the JA Solar is increased almost 100% a year in last 7 years. And this is showing where is the industry going, what's going to happen next step. Basically, this is based on the U.S. Some business schools, any new industry's business model. So any new industry like the internet or IT or semiconductor, they follow a so-called S-curve. And the horizontal axis is the time, vertical axis is the scale of the industry. So the first stage is normally called technology driving. So if an entrepreneur have some technology, they can start up some company and go to IPO and grow to a few thousand people, 10,000 people. And that's happened in this stage. And normally have, like Silicon Valley Semiconductor, in 70s, there are 500 companies. So that's right. Right now, since happened in China, Europe and China, so there are more than 700 companies in China doing PV. That's the first stage. However, once the product is generally accepted by the society, and they enter into second stage, so-called product driving. And then the competition is the scale, supply chain, globalization, and all these things. And I think it's through this period stage is most exciting, and in solar is next 10 years. And through this 10 years, 700 globally, 1,000 company, maybe we're reduced to dozens of companies. And until the global market is saturated. So this stage we're very fast growing in next 10 years, and they can generate in IBM or Intel or Microsoft in the solar field. And also after that, the global market is saturated. There is a replacement market. However, currently the solar industry is facing the cyclical. It's growing because all the average prices drop quickly. Or even China, the top 5 industries, gross margin is going to almost zero. So it's very right now it's very overcapacity. Okay, the competition become it's not healthy right now. You can say that, but the reason, the driving force, really is people thinking this industry is money making, right? And a lot of capital, the capital is pursue the profit. So it's overcapacity, overinvestment. And this thing has to be adjusted by the marketing economy, and has to be, the weaker one or mismanaged has to be phased out. Then the industry consolidation has to happen. Also in this stage, we can see in whole industry chain, the manufacturer sector in the upper stream, the Chinese company almost taking leadership in all the sectors of the supply chain, except the downstream application. So we're thinking the industry were segmented to the manufacturer sector and also application sector. So application sector is like the utility company. It's very localized. It's also semi-monopoly in different country, right? So this distribution will be helpful to optimize the cost and also speed up the industry grid parity. Also, if we look at the little bit different, I think you heard a lot of this trade conflict and also the technology and everything. But if we look at this thing from the historical angle, so in the 19th centuries, the UK is leading the technology, the transfer to Europe and North America. And in 20th century early days, US transfer technology to Japan and Germany. And also IT industry from Japan to Asia to 4 small tigers, and also eventually to China. Right? For PV industry right now, actually the manufacture technology and also the management know-how, right now China is leading the world. And we can see the manufacture maybe or technology will spread out around the world from China. And that's first time happened to different industry. It's no surprise they have different response from the, globally. So the next I will introduce very briefly about who is JA Solar. So JA Solar is a basically leading solar cell company. We are from the 2010 we become largest solar cell manufacturer globally. The company is young. It's formed in 2005 and went to IPO in 2007. And right now have 12,000 employees. The 2010 we have about $2 billion US dollars revenue. So basically, this is showing the product sale globally. Also, there are manufacturer base across the country. Headquarters is in Shanghai, and also in the Yangzhou, Hefei, or near Beijing, and have 6 manufacturer base. And also, from this down cycle, JA Solar is relatively financially conservative. According to German Financial Times, we are one of the most stable company in the financial, sector. So debt to assets ratio, we are the number 1 in all the solar industry, and the equity to debt ratio also is the best position. And the volume shipment last year were number 2 globally. So this showing the some benchmark or production line, and also we have technology roadmap, and also the for solar cell, and also for module. And also the product quality and reliability, we keep constantly pushing this, and because this product need to last 25 years. And once the power plant generated, we guarantee for 20 years operation. And this is showing we have strategic partnership with TUV, which is European standard certification organization, and also with the UAIR, which is US certification organization. And also our business model basically is more B2B. We're working with all the leaders in each country. And E.ON in Germany is not just a utility company. And Sun Edison, US, and Siemens, and all this, or China Power Investment. So we more emphasize about the B2B business model. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fang. That was a fascinating presentation. Let me suggest we continue with the order in the program, even though we had thought we would alter it, but I think it makes more sense if we hear from the industry first, and then we expand into other areas. And invite Jody Russell, who's been very kind to fly late last night from Frankfurt to substitute for her chairperson and CEO at Trinidad Solar Group, Jifan Gao. It's a pity we don't have Jifan Gao. He's It's a great speaker and a great, particularly a great promoter of sustainability. He played a big role in the Rio Plus 20 negotiations, and he's been really advocating towards sustainability now for a number of years. But Julia, if I may ask you to say something about you and then make your presentation, or Mr. Gall's presentation. You have the floor.
Sure. 就我在中文开始，所以我们所有中国朋友知道，如果以后商讨什么跟我们天和高基帆先生上讲的，我也在。他要送他就说是很困难，就是昨天一个事发生了，所以他突然不能坐飞机来，他很抱歉。But I'll give my speech in English alternatively, as it's my first language. And a brief amount of my background, I come from a Chinese studies background and have worked in solar energy and renewable energy for 12 years, including as well spending some time with our good colleague, Dr. Fang at JA Solar, with the World Economic Forum, leading the Energy Utility and Technology Partnership there, and now as Director of Public Affairs with Trina Solar based in Zurich. The comments I'd like to share today, as I recognize that Dr. Fang and also Mr. Zhao will be addressing the China domestic market and the ambitious plans that China has there, I thought I would focus the remarks from Trina more specifically on the challenges of production and use at a global level, specifically surrounding trade for clean energy goods. And I'd like to propose three different lenses that we can look at this challenge of clean energy trade with. Firstly, recognizing the allure of protectionism. Secondly, a dialogue to facilitate global free trade. And thirdly, that incentives do not have to be barriers. And I'll illustrate these 3 points with some remarks about the situation the solar energy industry finds itself in today in Europe and globally. Firstly, recognizing the allure of protectionism. The Secretary of the General, Mr. Lamé of the WTO, had said quite eloquently, I thought, that many people think protectionism works, but it doesn't. In the clean energy space, we have a long industry history of government support in the form of local content requirements, in the form of tariffs, in the form of special certifications that can block out international competitors. The background, the clean energy industry today is caught in a multi-region looming trade conflict that threatens to grow quite large. The United States and Korea right now are the subject of a polysilicon anti-dumping investigation launched by China. The United States has launched inquiries into Chinese wind products, as well as Chinese solar PV products. The EU has launched an investigation into Chinese solar PV products. And as well, some other industries are currently launching investigations, such as China launching an inquiry about EU wine, and the EU threatening to launch another inquiry into Chinese telecoms. So we find ourselves in a very difficult moment in global clean energy free trade, and we also see that there are a number of other industries that are also being negatively impacted by bilateral conflict over trade. Secondly, one of the possible solutions, a dialogue to address global free trade and clean energy. We are a strong supporter of the work that ICTSD does in facilitating global dialogue on free trade and clean energy, and we believe that more dialogue needs to exist. I'll, to that extent, try to keep my remarks today as brief as possible to benefit from questions and dialogue with the audience. Secondly, the EU-China summit that took place in the past week, another important indicator of the value that the European Union and China place on strengthening a bilateral relationship with clean energy being one of the topics. The APEC dialogue that took place earlier in the month was a really great shining light of possible progress in reductions of tariffs for clean energy products. If you didn't follow the discussions, one of the agreements made was to reduce tariffs on a variety of clean energy products from solar and wind technologies, both thermal and photovoltaic PV, as well as sustainable bamboo building materials, insulation materials. All of these industries benefited from an APEC commitment to reduce tariffs from ranges of 15 to over 40% to under 5% by 2015. And this is a very strong result, I believe, of a good multilateral dialogue that's going to facilitate opening up markets and the creation of a lot of good new green jobs in Asia. The World Economic Forum is also supporting a dialogue with the G2A2 Green Growth Action Alliance. And where the industry stands today is we are very much dependent on the government dialogue and the intergovernmental dialogue, as well as the work that non-governmental organizations play in facilitating a conversation about why it is important to move forward with clean energy support to the point where we reach grid parity, which Mr. Fang spoke eloquently about, when clean energy prices are the same as prices for traditional forms of energy sold on the grid, and where clean energy can be an economic choice, not only a philosophical and moral choice for people all over the world. Why this is important in the EU today, I think I have one slide. Can we pop it up? I just wanted to illustrate there are a lot of regions in the world that have very strong businesses in the clean energy space. This is an illustration of regions of the world that are present in different parts of the PV value chain, some countries, some regions. So from raw materials and capital equipment to cells and modules, systems development, as well as project financing, we see many different regions of the world playing an important role working together to build a global supply chain. And we believe that protectionism greatly poses a very great risk to limiting the amount of interaction that's happening between all of these steps of the supply chain to reduce costs and to reach the point where solar energy is really affordable. And so I think it's important that all regions of the world continue to look at ways that through dialogue we can open up to free trade and increase economic opportunity for all of these regions. Thirdly, thank you. Incentives don't need to be barriers. 118 countries currently have clean energy policies to incentivize the production and growth of these industries. This is not an accident. This is a result of years and years of work developing technologies and providing good quality solutions. Work that Mr. Fang's company, that my company, Trina Solar, have been doing, in our case, for over 15 years. It's important for governments to agree on what is an incentive and what is an illegal subsidy, because this question is behind many of the trade disputes that I listed earlier that are right now slowing down progress, growing markets, and growing the distribution of these important technologies. I recognize that APEC has launched a dialogue on PV, and I hope that there will be even more work launched to have a multi-stakeholder dialogue on why it is important to agree on what is an incentive, what is an illegal subsidy, so everyone can agree what rules will we play by, because bilateral conflict is not the solution. Why is this important? China has been a world leader in PV since 2007 with over 10 gigawatts of production in 2010. It's a $2 billion US export industry just to the EU every year. 300,000 Europeans are employed in this industry, and of those 300,000, about 70% are working in jobs that are directly a result of the Chinese modules that are exported here. The 300,000 are just a portion of the 1.2 million people who are today working in green energy, which is an important growth area coming out of a period of financial crisis all over the world. So I'll leave my remarks here, asking you to ponder the question about how incentives don't have to be barriers and how through dialogue we might be able to work together to have a meaningful conversation between companies, governments, and civil society to move forward clean energy in a productive way and a cooperative way. Thank you.
Thank you, Jody, and thank you for covering the area that you have. It has indeed been very complimentary to Dr. Fang's presentation. Let me turn now to Professor Peter Droge. That's the right pronunciation. And Peter is Professor and Chair of Sustainable Spatial Development at the University of Liechtenstein. and president of Eurosolar, the European Association of Renewable Energy. So he comes with both an academic and an industry hat. Peter, please.
Also with a very small Chinese hat, I'm delighted to report that very shortly I'll be celebrating my 30th anniversary of working in China. I was fortunate enough to have a tenured short position at Tsinghua University in the early 80s, and I've been able to maintain my relationships to Chinese partners since then. I am also delighted that the entire discourse today is very much linked. We spoke about the large global trade issues. We had a WTO introduction this morning. We spoke about urbanization. We spoke about the need for consumption, domestic consumption. All these issues are energy related, and it's critical to remind ourselves that the entire global economic system depends on one thing only, and that's fossil fuels. Today, 85% of commercial energy supply is fossil fuel based. If you have taken any other transport mode but your feet, horse or donkey, you're part of a transport user group which depends to 95% on oil. 95% of all transport energy is oil-based today. And it's roughly the rate that all industrial production and food production depends on. Now, I don't have to tell you that the chief economist of the International Energy Agency, Veit Birol, in 2009 admitted that our oil peak globally in conventional oil production was already in 2006. That means for the last 6 years we are in an unconventional oil production phase. We are in fact squeezing oil out of tar sands. We're drilling in deep water. We're in a situation which, unfortunately, our large economic policy makers still refuse to ignore. But I'm also delighted to be here because China is one of the nations of the world which has not ignored that. China has last year been the largest investor in renewable energy in the world, before the United States. 260 billion US dollars were invested in renewable energy, more than 50 billion by China, more than the US. China is also the largest owner of installed wind power capacity. It's the largest producer of wind turbines in the world, the largest producer of solar modules and panels in the world. It has an extraordinary track record in expanding its renewable energy capacity domestically, but also internationally. But there's a kind of a, let's say, misalignment of interests still very much permanent in China, which reflect the global situation. Researchers from Harvard University and Tsinghua Daxue have discovered that China could be energy independent by 2030. Its entire electricity demand could be supplied by domestic wind power. Now that's a wonderful prospect, isn't it? Well, it's not such a great prospect for the incumbent industries because a lot of fossil fuel, nuclear-based business models tend to collapse with that kind of prospect. So perhaps it's not surprising that the Chinese premier in March this year announced that China will slow down the blind expansion into renewables. And by that he meant there'll be more focus on traditional supplies of baseload power like nuclear, even drilling for shale gas, and reliance on traditional hydropower. I think it's important to recognize that there is a continued focus on renewables, but there is a shift taking place. I think that one has to be mindful of, and I'm glad that we have an opportunity to discuss that. Even within the mix of Chinese renewables, there has been that shift. There has been an over-focus on large hydro of a mega size, which tends to threaten social and environmental conditions. there has been perhaps an overemphasis on offshore wind. More than 75% of Chinese wind capacity is offshore. And that tends to be a very expensive, very maintenance intensive, risky proposition, as we now have learned in Europe. There's also an overemphasis within the bioenergy world on ethanol. Ethanol is mimicking or trying to mimic traditional oil supplies, but is also competing with other agricultural products. And if you remember that if you plant corn on a hectare of land, you can drive with that hectare supplied fuel for about 6,000 kilometers a year. But if you plant solar PV on that same surface, you can drive over 1 million kilometers a year. That means you get 60 to 70 times more energy out of the same area of energy sources if you use solar PV than if you use biofuel. Therefore, there is an overemphasis on that part in the Chinese government. On the other hand, there has been an underemphasis in investment in PV domestically. Solar is still very much the neglected duckling in the energy mix in China. There's also been a gross underemphasis on geothermal. Only 2% of the Chinese solar resources, geothermal resources have been realized, even though they've been known for almost a decade. And that has to do with, I believe, a kind of being perhaps a bit stuck in an old model of what energy is all about, in a fossil fuel model. That's not surprising. The world is stuck in that. We all grew up with that model of long-distance supply of electricity and energy resources from a few large thermal power plants, from a few producing countries in the world, whether it's coal or oil, large-scale centralized supply for distributed use. Now, the new energy model is very different. That's distributed production at the point of consumption. It's much closer to computing in a ubiquitous scale. In other words, the renewable energy model relies on resources that have no costs, no primary costs, and they can be produced anywhere. So I think that's why I think this importance, we are very at a critical political, sort of energy political point in our history where we need to recognize this very different paradigm. So I see a great and bright future in China because I also see an opportunity to support social and economic development on a local level in China through an energy transformation which supports the local self-reliance on their own resources. The renewable energy resources are sufficient throughout China to supply local communities and local cities, local regions. We've known that for some time from other parts of the world. We also know that there are great opportunities for value generation on a local level. So a kind of a re-regionalization strategy from the large cities to the central and western and northwestern parts of China. They are not utopian. They're being pursued very strenuously by the Chinese government with the international partners. But they have been missing so far the energy autonomy component. The ability to map, understand the local energy resources and the ability of self-reliant energy generation on a regional, local level, and the ability, as we have seen it now in Germany and other parts of European Union, the ability not only to generate but to export energy and to generate income for local and regional communities. And there you have it. I think beyond calling for local consumption or domestic consumption, we ought to be calling also for local and domestic production. That means energy production, prosumption, and a kind of a beginning of a more sophisticated networking, energy demand and supply, using advanced networks, using advanced storage systems, and opening up the revolution that Dr. Pang and others have spoken about, that really are, I think, following the telecommunications and IT revolution from 20 years ago. And I see a very bright future, but there is a paradigm shift necessary. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Professor Droge. And okay, thank you, Professor Droge. That was also a very good sort of reminder of both the balances as well as the political economy that is involved in the on these issues, and then the choices that we make, which is actually the thrust of the dialogue today. So we'll get a bit more into this. What I'd like to do now is introduce Zhongqian Shao, and Zhongqian is a good friend in Beijing, working now with a new research institution, the Energy Research Institute of the National Development and Reform Commission, specifically in its renewable energies cell, which has been very recently set up. We've been working with him and his colleagues in the past 2 years and on trade policy aspects of renewables, and we're really very happy that you were able to be with us. Zhongqian.
Okay, thank you. Since I think my Chinese is much better than English, I'd like to speak in Chinese and make me better understood. So, 非常高兴能够参加这次这个中国转型中国这是国际政治经济，而且这个题目现在而且涵盖了能源新能源这个题目，应该说是对我们来说是有喜有忧啊。喜的是新能源这个成为一个很好也是很重要的一个题目，也发展前景也非常广阔。忧的是短短几年时间呢，我们就从一个培育产业发展成功启动这个阶段，进入到一个产业这个越来越复杂的这样一个阶段。所以这个借此机会呢，我们也想跟大家交流一下中国的新能源发展的情况，以及我们对这个中国和国际吧新能源发展的以后一些的几个问题吧。我想刚才我说的，中国的新能源发展，应该说是非常快的，应该是从05年才真正开始启动大规模的新能源的开发利用。从那一年就出台了可再生能源法，等于说这个市场规模是迅速启动，风电装机是每年翻一番，一直到2009年。太阳能市场启动会慢一些，但是去年前年应该说增长也比较快。结果到了而且这个设备制造业等于说也很快的也发展起来了，应该是满足了国内的需求啊。但是自从我想2010年就开始一些国际上的一些贸易一些争端，对我们来说应该是新鲜事物。我们是能源这个发出门，主要的职能是促进能源结构的改变，促进新能源的利用。但是呢，转眼间这个新能源产业成为一个国际贸易的一个争端的一个领域，这对我们来说也是一个新的一个挑战。但是呢，实际上我们认为这个新能源发展呢还是不够快，还是离我们这个清洁发展，离我们那个应对气候变化的一些目标还是不够的，远远不够的。但是为什么会出现这种情况呢？我想从中国来说，可能有几方面问题。但是首先一点，我还想强调一下，中国的新能源发展是这个全球新能源发展的一个很重要的一个组成部分。05年以来，中国的新能源产业从国外引进了这样一个人才、技术，甚至政策本身都是借鉴了欧洲、美国的一些政策，比如说固定电价，就是 FIT， 在欧洲有很好的成效啊。所以说，在这个整个全球新能源发展这种浪潮中，中国是参与其中，而且走得相对快了一些。等于说是中国的这个把这个过程给浓缩了，从欧美国家可能10几年、20几年，我们用5、6年的时间把它走过来，这样的话也肯定会产生一些问题。这样的问题，我想认为是阶段性的一些问题吧。 我们需要考虑的这些一些因素。但从国际上来看呢，我认为这是有一些外部的一些因素。首先，这个全球新能源市场在过去几年中也出现一种政策的滞后比如说随着产业的迅速发展，但是欧洲国家，特别德国、意大利，甚至还有波兰嘛，他们继续采用这个固定电价，而且是我想它这个固定价本意是非常好的，但是说在这个产业发展的阶段进入到一个市场是几何级数快速增加的时候，它不一定能够适应这种市场的变化。虽然德国后来也是加快这个固定电价支持这个改变的频率，但是说呢，政策与市场的还是有差距的，政策变化难以跟上市场，这说明这个政策需要改变。另一个就是这个产业，中国这个产业的确是有内部的一些问题，我们也认识到，新能源设备制造企业在市场的拉动下，迅速发展，但是呢，它有一些行政一些驱动因素，也有一些中国产业发展一些共同的一些问题，它是快速的规模扩张，这样成为一种非常非常普遍的现象。我想它有它的可能是有代表性产业发展阶段，就像刚才方博士说，在一个 production driven 这个阶段，但是说呢，它本身产业发展的质量可能是也的确是需要改善，存在着一些简单规模化扩张和一些短期的一些因素。那么未来怎么样呢？我想是国内外这个全球新能源产业这个市场还是发展前景非常非常广阔。我们才刚刚处于这个进入这个产业发展的一个早期的一个阶段，或者是进入中期，刚刚进入中期这个阶段。说新一轮的能源革命也才刚刚启动，大家知道，过去2年来，欧洲国家、美国还有中国，都开始讨论，不光是2020年近中期的一些目标，而且在讨论2050年的目标。欧洲委员会是出台了2050能源路线图，提出在2050年，可再生能源满足50%的能源需求，80%的电力需求。这是一个巨大的能源系统转型，从以化石能源为主的能源系统转向以可再生能源、新能源为主的能源系统。我想我们正处在这个巨大转型的刚刚的还是一个起步阶段，这对一个各国市场、各国产业都是一个巨大的一个发展空间。而且这个过程呢，我想是中国和其他国家是一种互动的，是互相促进的一个关系。从这个应对气候变化，从这个新的战略新兴产业发展，从这个具体的能源这个结构变革来说，中国这个发展也是得到了欧洲的一些和美国他们的一些战略制定和一些业界人士的推动，得到他们这些这个激励、启发，应该说也得到他们的促进。但是呢，面向以后这个能源治理这个政策，还需要很多很多的问题，我想需要我们那些共同一些去研究、去探讨。我想大家新能源虽然存在一些争端、国际争端，但是我想国际新能源业界都应该认识到，也会认识到，我们根本的挑战是与化石能源的竞争，新能源与化石能源竞争。就现在而言，虽然刚刚进入了新能源发展规模化发展阶段，但是在各国内部，我想都遇到了，新能源产业界都遇到与传统能源、化石能源界的一个，愈演愈烈的冲突。这个冲突还不断的，应该说是在加剧。就中国而言，风电才发展到应该说5000多万千瓦吧，太阳能发电才300万千瓦，在能源供应中的比例，在电力中的比例，风电才2%，太阳能微乎其微，不到应该0.几吧。但是呢，它改变了这个传统能源系统的运营这个模式，改变了他们的利益格局， 已经产生了一个巨大的冲突。这个可能是不是中国自己面对的，也是全球各国都面对的一些问题。就是我们需要从这个角度来共同来看看新能源怎么发展，而不是说，这个新能源本身它是一个竞争，是一个这样问题，是一个根本的问题。我们的问题一定要在深刻的认识到，它是化石能源与新能源之间的一些竞争问题。也这个新能源的发展应该说是必然的一个趋势，但是说这个路途还是非常的艰难的。然后从政策上，我想，从前几年这个启动市场阶段，培育产业阶段，这个政策一定要转型到怎么支撑这个能源系统转型这个阶段。这个支持政策，我想应该是更加的稳定，不像新能源产业前几年支持政策受到一个金融危机的影响受到各国一些什么债务危机的影响对这个新能源产业市场发展影响是巨大的。但是为了实现这个能源转型，我们政策一定要建立更稳定的一个政策框架。这是一个我想都是各国面对一个共同问题。在德国，他们提出2050年这个能源转型这个战略，虽然但已经近期吧，已经是产生了业界的一些争论，对它这个发展呢，我想也是有负面影响的。这怎么共同研究制定促进新能源持续稳定的发展政策框架，更稳定的政策框架，这是我们非常非常重要的一个任务。然后这个政策呢，也应该从这个行政驱动下转向这个怎么维护一个更好的市场秩序，减少行政干预。我想，创造一个竞争性市场。举个例子，比如说就是个电力应用市场。现在在中国而言，为什么风电、太阳能发电在目前已经遇到很严重的挑战？其中之一还是认为中国现在这个市场还是一个非市场化的一个能源部门。能源部门还是计划经济的色彩非常浓重。我们在这方面应该是可以向发达国家、向欧美进行学习一下。他们早在90年代已经完成了能源部门的一些市场化改革。我想这是能够互相促动我们发展的一个因素。另一方面就是这个贸易政策，坦白地说，我们认为中国这个贸易政策可以出台一些贸易政策，来够维护中国这个新能源设备制造业这个发展以及国际贸易，促成一个更有序的吧，然后更自律的这样一个行业的发展这个秩序，减少这样一些冲突，共同维护这个全球这个市场发展的环境。另一方面，我们认为，这个贸易政策本身也需要一些改变。我们知道，举一个例子，现在这个贸易政策是一个国际政治经济秩序一个非常非常敏感，但是的确非常非常重要的一个问题。它现在也处在这个变化之中。我知道几年前，为了作为应对气候变化的一个措施吧，欧美发达国家提出一个环境产品服务这样一个项目，说这样一类产品可以免收，建议各国免收这个税收政策。当时的目录里面包括太阳能光伏产品，但是又不包括一些燃料，当时巴西的燃料乙醇。但是我们就觉得这个政策也是很奇怪的，为什么就是说当时没有给些理由，是说是因为环境问题不让那个燃料乙醇作为加入这个名单。等几年过去以后呢，发现这个形势完全变过来了。这个理由呢，我不知道什么理由，现在就是不让那个又不提环境产品，不提环境服务贸易了。那是不是这当初的出发点就不完全是一种从环境角度、气候角度呢？另外就是说，在这个新的形势下，是不是在这个全球化 进入新的阶段，甚至有人说这个全球化的目前模式不大要变化，要部分回归这个本地化，还是怎么样的模式？随着这个新的经济形态可能是相当一部分经济活动也要发生在本地。那么在这样的情况下，这样这个新的贸易政策，我想也应该值得去探讨一下，怎么适应新的这个经济形态、新的发展阶段。这是一些需要注意的问题，但是我对这个产业的发展应该说是还是非常有信心的，因为现在新能源产业它是处于一个政府支持，然后迅速扩大、迅速发展这样一个阶段。再过，我想未来5年吧，就像方博士提到的，到2020年，更早2015年，光伏发电可以实现这个平价。我想那个时候，这个产业已经可以进入自主发展。这个政策也可以逐步的推出，那么就是说，它可以进入一个非常好的良性的一个发展一个环境，随着这个技术扩散这个经济转型，我想全球各国都会发展出自己的非常有竞争力的，但是有能够互相和谐发展的一个新能源的一个产业，这样的产业将来会是一个成熟的产业，它是一个正常化的产业，而不是像过去1-2年来，现在这是一个既繁荣，但是又充满一个争端、争执的一个产业。我们相信这个阶段可能在几年以后吧，就可以到来。好，谢谢大家。
Thank you very much, Zhongcheng. Also, again, for bringing some additional issues on the table and sort of introducing us to the next topic, or the topic that will be rather the focus of our next speaker. Not, I think, in an uncontroversial manner, so we'll come back to you from the floor for probably the questions and answers. So I have the pleasure of introducing Luca Rubini, who is Deputy Director of the Institute of European Law at Birmingham Law School. Luca has been working with us now for some time as well, and has done some research and analysis related to subsidies. He has a wonderfully creative mind when it comes to titles for his intellectual production, and so he just put out a piece that should probably be a good read for everybody here interested in these subjects, called Ain't Wasting Time No More, which is on sustainable renewable energy, the subsidies and countervailing measures agreement in the WTO, and options for policy reform there. And he's also working with our colleague Ingrid Jegu and on another piece titled Hold Stop the Rain, this time dealing with issues related to the free allocation of emission allowances in emission trading schemes. And so he's been looking at those issues from the WTO law perspective, and again, as I said, looking forward to what are the options that we have ahead for reform. So it tracks very well with some of the comments that Zhongcheng just made. Luca, may I give you the floor?
Thanks very much, Ricardo. Thanks to the organizer for inviting me. So before starting with my very little speech, and I have just 3 or 4 points there, I was struck by some comments of the speakers, which I think are terribly interesting, and I'm very much relieved with that because I can see that what I'm going to say in my little contribution, I mean, and many of these points are there. Jody was saying an important question for business is what is a legal subsidy? Well, I can tell you I'm a lawyer by professional, working many years on this. We still do not know. But I will explain you a little bit later this point. And another thing which is important is how incentives should not become barriers. That's, again, another very important question, which is an economic question, but also a trade question. And I will try to touch a little bit that as well. Dr. Fang was talking, very interesting, explaining us and showing a lot of facts and data, and incidentally said FIT is a subsidy. That's great. From an economic point of view, that's clear-cut. But, you know, the intricacy comes when you start to look at the law. Is a FIT, a feed-in tariff, a subsidy according to the law? We still do not know. This is just, an appetizer of my little speech. And without further ado, I do move to that. I have 4 points I would like to make. The first one is it's really a couple of words on the economic and policy background. No more than that. I do not expand a lot on that because I'm not an economist, and I would risk making a lot of mistakes and simplifications with that. The second point is very much an assessment, a brief assessment, and I will try to be as plain as possible of the current rules on subsidies that we have in the WTO, and in particular I will try to look at them from a specific lens. What amount of policy space, what degree of policy space do these rules give to members if they want to give subsidies to support renewable energy? Is this policy space good? Is it too much? Is it sufficient? So that's the kind of questions, the lens I'm going to use. Third point is very much about the future. Another comment that was made is that we need to adapt the trade system. So that's, again, the focus of my third point. And finally, in a few words, I will try to see what role China, particularly from a political and a diplomatic point of view, which again is not my area, so I might oversimplify over there, might play in this respect. First point, the economic and policy point. From my research and even talking with people, listening here, I could see that there is some agreement that at least in some cases, under certain conditions, some form of public support is needed with respect, for example, to renewable energy, if you have market failures, obstacles, so on and so forth. The big question, of course, is what type of support, when, and when should we stop? So these are crucial economic and policy questions. These questions, of course, are of tremendous importance when you move to the legal analysis. Also, and particularly if you are speculating about whether we should change the rules or not. So that's the first point. Second point, what about the rules, the famous or infamous WTO subsidy rules? I don't know how many of you are familiar with it, but I will try to stay very, very simple and to use almost a bullet point approach. In general, let me be clear, the rules do not prohibit subsidization. So there is some degree in principle of policy space. You can grant subsidies. You can grant general subsidies, which means subsidies that are available to the whole economy across the board. No problem with that. You can even grant specific subsidies, provided that you do not cause cross-border negative trade effects. No problem with that. And provided that you do not include special conditions, like conditions that you have to, if you export, I'm going to give you the subsidy, that's an export subsidy, that's strictly prohibited, or probably more relevant here, if you subject the grant of the subsidy to the use of inputs or products that are locally sourced, a local content subsidy. The rules are clear with that. This is prohibited. Then if we try to be more specific, of course, I might try to provide this kind of assessment. If you design the subsidy as a consumption subsidy, which is particularly neutral, you should not have any particular problem under WTO law. By contrast, if you design your support as a form of production subsidy, you might have more problems. From a practical point of view, if the production subsidy goes to the production of energy, you might not have, up to now, a lot of problems. Why? Because the practical point is that we do not have a lot of cross-border trade in energy. But if you're talking about subsidization to renewable energy technology, the story is a little bit different. We have a lot of cross-border trade and international competition in technology. So this is just, I'm trying to be very simple, but just to give you an idea of what the rules say. So you might say, okay, the rules are fine. They provide, some policy space. We can do many things, and countries, if they want, can do many things. That's one side of the story. The other side of the story is that when you try to go beneath the surface and you try to consider even many of the measures that I said you can be fine, you might very soon encounter some difficulties because the law is not clear. The law is very complex, and in some cases it might even, trade law requirements might even be in conflict with the best policy prescription. I can give you a few examples. Tax incentives of any possible type. So I'm not saying one is better than the other. Again, I'm not an economist. But there are many tax incentives in the field, energy taxation, carbon taxation. Now, we got a problem here. The legal test in order to determine whether a tax, an energy tax, is a legal subsidy or not, is whether you can show that as a consequence of your measure, government revenue, which would be otherwise due, is foregone. What is the problem here? These two little words, otherwise due. Nobody really knows what they mean. So we have a serious scenario of legal uncertainty, because if you have to give advice to a government, or to a business, you cannot always give a clear-cut answer. That's one example. Regulation, going back to the example of feed-in tariff, we still do not know whether regulatory measures like feed-in tariffs or other types of mandates, renewable energy, renewable portfolio standards, or blending requirements for biofuel subsidies, we still do not know whether these are covered or not by the rules. Legal uncertainty. So these are just a couple of examples I'm giving you. I have provided a background note. You can go to it, and you may find further details over there. So my point is that we have a scenario where, going back to Jodi's point, it is very difficult to tell to business or to governments whether their type of support, even if they do their best to keep it non-protectionist, might be caught or not. And this leads me to my third point, a bit of speculation about the future. But I would like to add something before going to this point. The point is that you might counter-argue, okay, that's fine, but that's a very nice academic point, because, yes, we have rules that apparently are not perfect, they are not clear, there is some complexity, there is some uncertainty, but if you look around, in many decades, we have not had many legal challenges. Not many investigations at the national level, not many cases at the international level. But as many of you have mentioned already, things seem to be changing. I don't know whether it is the beginning of a trend or whether these are just trade dispute litigation skirmishes to reinstate the rules of the game. But since September 2010, we start to have significant litigation. So we have, again, something which does not work there. So a little bit of speculation about the future. Against this scenario of complexity and legal uncertainty, considering the importance of what is at stake, we need to have clarity for governments and business. And against this scenario of increasing litigation, many scholars, even off the record, many policymakers and some members from delegations would agree that the rules are not ideal, that we would need to go back to the rules and do something. We cannot leave everything to dispute settlement, to the up panels and to the appellate body of the WTO to clarify things. We would put too much responsibility on them, and in some cases they would not be able, because there are inherent limitations in the law, to give an answer. So the first best scenario would be for members who created the rules to sit down around the negotiating table and create new rules, which means create rules which specifically tell us whether some forms of support, and if so, when, are legitimate or not in the energy field, in the environmental field, possibly because they are linked. So this is, in my view, the first best scenario. If you go to the note, the background note I have circulated, you might see some of the points that could be raised in the context of this exercise. But I think this is something which would be very important. Now, of course, I'm very much realistic here and aware of the difficulties. We have been talking about this morning, you had Pascal Lamy, the difficulties of the Doha round. Everybody knows that. It's a notorious fact. So somebody could say you're mad. You're talking about to put something new in the negotiating agenda. Fine, that's a political and diplomatic point. But I think that the need is there. We need, from a legal point of view, more legal certainty, because legal certainty is good for business, is good for governments. And if you have increasing litigation, these issues might create practically problems. Now, final point about the role of China, and I conclude with that, hoping that I have not exceeded too much my allocated time. Of course, China plays a huge role from any point of view, from the trade point of view, from the economic point of view, from the political point of view. It is one of, and also in terms of climate change effects, it is a main contributor to climate change, and it is also a main sufferer of the effects of climate change. So it has all the interest, I would say, to have clearer rules concerning subsidization to renewable energy. So I conclude with maybe a naive but a plea that, China should very much try to support, if not sponsor, when the moment is the right one, this kind of change in the rules and take the lead. And, if you manage to have China, the United States, no simple fit, and the EU together, well, many things could be made. Many other countries could follow suit. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you, and thank you for that clarity of thinking about what are really complex but very, very critical issues right now. I'd like to use about 15 minutes, and I know that we're sort of at the limit that was given to us, but my various bosses here send me messages saying that we can take 15 minutes to do questions and answers before we break for coffee. So I'd like to offer the floor, but just before that, maybe taking the prerogative of sitting here. One of the issues that comes to my mind, and I imagine to also to some of yours, is with respect to that very steep and probably unfair competition between renewable energies and fossil fuels. So, simply speaking, the fuels in the fossil fuel the uses for energy supply are traded as commodities and very heavily traded. But that's not obviously the case with renewables, which use, by and large, public good fuels, wind and sun and so on. But the question that is looming for the past few years is whether we can use the current rules to govern over those subsidies that are provided both at production and consumption ends to fossil fuels. And I'd like to hear more in the context of this debate what you think about it, if you care to comment when you take the floor from the panel, and particularly from a Chinese perspective on those, and from Peter Draga's perspective. But just before that, let me allow the public to ask a few questions, and ask you to identify yourselves as you ask the questions just before that. Please, come in. Yeah, Mike.
Thank you very much. I'm Fabien Delcros, working with General Electric. And I want to congratulate you, Ricardo, for this great panel. It's really interesting. I have a comment and I have a question. My comment is the following. I was amazed by Dr. Fang's presentation and the slides, and especially those with the map of the world and showing how much world trade is a key engine for the development of clean technology. And without the world market, no prospect for the development of those technologies. The comment is that there is a good news that most of you are aware of, but I would just want to explain it a little bit into details, which is that 2 weeks ago, leaders at the Asia Pacific Economic Council Summit, the APEC Summit, agreed within this region of the world to actually dramatically lower tariffs applied on clean technologies, including on solar panel. And we are talking about a 600 billion trade volume. This is a huge progress toward more free trade for clean technologies. The very other interesting slide that was in Dr. Fang's presentation was the comparison between the clean tech industry and the IT industry, like the computer technology industry. And the reason why I found it really interesting is that those sitting in this room in 1996, coming from the information technology and the computer sector, had exactly the same discussion. What it is that trade could help the development of the Microsoft of this world, of the IBM of this world. And they drove an initiative that ended here in Geneva at the WTO to agree to eliminate tariffs on computers technology. We are at the very same juncture, and what was the effect on computer technology at the time was a multiplication per 4 in 10 years from $1 trillion into $4 trillion trade. The real effect of tariff elimination was huge. This is the comments, and sorry for having a little bit too long. But we have this good news, and it looks like leaders are ready to go toward the same path and eliminate tariff for green technologies. Would you think, and you have a better analysis and knowledge of the Chinese position and policy with that regard, would you think that what China signed 2 weeks ago could be extended to other trade powers? And if so, would you think that today we might be discussing the first day of negotiations of what could be the elimination of tariffs on clean technologies? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Fabian, and thank you for bringing back the APEC outcome, which we have mentioned scatteredly through the day. But I think that it's good to put a bit more of time into understanding what happened there and what are the consequences. Yeah, if I may give the floor to the 4 of you and 5, and then we come back, and I'll have to ask you to be brief, and I'm sorry to do that. Maybe we can start here, yes, and then go back here, and then Mahesh, please.
Thank you very much.
You have to speak louder, Thomas.
I'm Thomas Baird. I'm with the EU mission here in Geneva, working on subsidies of the non-agricultural variety. Like Dr. Rubini, I was very much interested by the comment made by Jody that it is important to agree on what is an incentive and what is an illegal subsidy. And there seem to be 2 assumptions in that statement, that you as an industry need certain incentives, and that you as an industry have maybe some concerns that some of those incentives are actually illegal subsidies. So my question to both industry representatives would be, what incentives do you consider necessary for your industry, and what concerns do you have as an industry that such incentives might be considered illegal? Now, I heard Dr. Rubini, and I very much appreciate his views. I understand that he saw some legal uncertainty, but you as businesses, do you have that same uncertainty? What is that uncertainty that you see in relation to some incentives that you think are necessary? Thank you.
Great. Thank you. That's a great question. Please.
Tom Miles from Reuters. I have a perhaps related question for Jody Roussel. You talked about the need for dialogue, but your competitors see Chinese solar companies as getting illegal subsidies and then dumping their products on the rest of the world. So, of course, now it's a good time for you to propose dialogue. But what do you actually propose? I mean, obviously you want to avoid trade disputes. What are you proposing? What do you think could really come out of that? What can you offer? And a question for Mr. Zhao. I'd just like, if possible, you to elaborate a little more on your words that China needs a new policy, a new trade policy in this area, because concretely, what are you suggesting is needed? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thomas. In the back, please. Thank you.
Philippe Bonnier from the Greater Geneva Bird Area. We heard that we are nearly reaching grid parity. And actually, we hear a lot of statements regarding reaching or not grid parity. And I understand it depends very much on how we compute the cost of the traditional electricity source, on the cost of the solar photovoltaic energy. So could somebody elaborate about the various way of computing those costs, and we may end up with the conclusion that we have already reached grid parity or that we are still far from grid parity?
Thank you. And we have a last question on this side. We have Mahesh over there, please.
Thank you very much. Mahesh Sugathan from ICTSD. I have two questions, one to Mr. Jifan Gao and the second to Jody. Mr. Jifan Gao, you mentioned that solar is going to be increasingly a bigger share of the renewable energy pie in the coming years. But then we also heard the views that China is also putting emphasis on traditional energy sources, going more towards shale gas, fossil fuels, etc. And increasingly the development of shale gas in the US, experts say that that's going to push down the prices. How do you see solar PV competing in that scenario? I mean, especially if shale gas is developed in a lot of countries. And the question to Jody is, we hear a lot about jobs and green jobs these days and how dumping and subsidies are giving rise to job losses in Europe, in the US. But we also heard you say that Chinese companies, because of the import of panels, are creating jobs within Europe and within the US. But we don't see those kind of facts coming out more. I mean, usually in the media we hear more about how trade, with China is leading to job losses within. So how do you think that companies could sort of put the emphasis more on the other side of the equation? Thank you.
Thank you, Mahesh. Last question on this side, please.
I am Elisa Baroncini from the University of Bologna, and I have one question for Jody Russell. You mentioned that within APEC, a dialogue on photovoltaic companies has been set up. I wonder whether it has already been structured and in which way it has already been structured, whether governments participate just only as facilitators, whether the photovoltaic companies are just only companies based within APEC countries, and whether there is already an agenda within these dialogues, which could be important for also helping the agenda for a future agreement, trying to settle things on whether or not an incentive is a subsidy or a subsidy is an incentive, and so on. And then a short question for Luca Rubini. Let's assume that all these incentives are illegitimate subsidies. Well, is it possible to apply the general exception clause of the GATT to the subsidy and countervailing measures agreement of the WTO? What do you think about this?
Well, thank you. Okay, so we're going to eat up on the cocktail time. That's my promise to both Jean-Pierre and Scott, because otherwise we're eating up on their session. So let me sort of organize the responses, at least in the order. But what I'd like to do is ask each of the panelists to take up any of the questions that were made. I have a record here, and we'll make sure that we respond to all of them. And I start with Professor Peter Draghi. So you can take the floor, Peter.
I just wanted to maybe clarify two things that Luca Rubini mentioned that it's not terribly clear whether feed-in tariffs are a subsidy or not. I think it's been very well established within the European Union that they're not a subsidy. There's been a long dispute between the EU and Germany over this matter.
Yes, but not in the WTO.
Yeah, but I think it's been legally quite well established that they're not a subsidy. You also mentioned that there is no real trade in energy, but while that's physically true, there is a heavy trade in electricity in Europe, and there's also heavy trade in oil, uranium, and coal, and all these energy carriers are heavily subsidized. I mean, the largest subsidies in the world are nuclear fossil fuel subsidies, and I just wonder why we're not applying these WTO rules to try to remove those subsidies, and then we would spend less time on worrying about whether we should keep these or those subsidies for renewable energies. And finally, I think after 25 years of climate change building up over our heads and the clarity that is so manifest to us about the resource cost and ecological cost of our energy system, how come external costs have not entered yet the debate, and how long would it take or how difficult could it possibly be to include external costs in the energy cost equation and make them part of the subsidy dimension?
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. Those are two key issues that, again, could take us another day of debate, but let's come back to them. Just one quick comment on my part on the feed-in tariffs, and obviously the question there, as in any trade law issue, is that the devil is really in the detail, and in the feed-in tariff case, it depends on the design of the scheme. And so the case, for instance, that is being heard at the WTO now, it's of a somewhat different nature from the type of understanding in Europe, where there's the tariff is conditioned on local content, and so this is again some of the differences that play around here. But let me add to I think the point that I understood Professor Jog is making, which I also don't get tired of making, which is that when we're talking about renewable energies, of course we have to do the type of analysis that we're doing as if we were talking particularly on technologies and the trading technologies, if we were talking about goods in general. But we can't lose sight of the fact that we are talking about, again, policy objectives and societal aspirations that have to do with, again, energy access, energy security, and mitigation of climate change, which should change the way in which we look specifically at this sector. Just from a commercial perspective, this is not a sector that, if you liberalize trade, is going to behave I'm not contradicting what Fabienne said, but it's not going to behave, say, like the IT sector. You don't open here and the sector and clean it of distortions, and tomorrow you're going to have a huge surge in trade and production and use and so on. We know that the incredible importance of regulations and mandates in terms of the stimulating the scale up, and then again, we know that it is somewhat of a competition with fossil fuels, which is not only the subsidization, is the lack of internalization of environmental cost and other advantages. But let me leave it there and turn now perhaps to the industry before we go to the more technical discussion on the with Luca and Zhongchang. So, Dr. Fang.
Okay. Maybe I can address one question about the grid parity. How do you calculate it? So basically, I think in the industry right now is driving two goals. The first goal is try to reach the so-called user side grid parity. Means when you pay an electricity bill, commercial or industry or consumer, right? There are certain price, and normally it's higher than the supply side. So basically, people are thinking about if you reach the $2 per install a watt of a PV, in the typical medium radiation area, 1,000 hours per year, you can generate in 10 US cents per kilowatt hour type of electricity. So 10 cents per hour of electricity use US as a large user. They can reach the so-called user side grid parity at large, right? So that's one goal, which actually already realized last year industry-wise. So next goal is really drive for $1 per watt of installation, which can generate in 5 US cents per kilowatt hour. If you reach this goal, at least in US, I think also China energy is more expensive, Europe as well. So you can generate in the supply side grid parity. Means 5 cents per kilowatt hour is about the lowest cost. Normally, the large utility company or even nuclear is close to that type of cost. So if you reach this goal, I think in the claim industry say that it's largely reached the global grid parity. So this goal in the manufacturer side, in the leading companies, can be reached by end of next year. And in some of the application downstream side, maybe given 2 to 3 years, I think they can reach this goal. So before 2016, I think in large scope of global PV industry, you can reach this goal. The only thing is if there is no disruptive, right now the trade barrier, or we don't know how far they will go, that's maybe slow down this significantly.
Thank you, Dr. Frank. Jody?
A number of questions have been posed. I'll try to respond to 2 of them briefly, and I'm happy to speak with anyone else afterwards. One of the questions that was asked, following on Dr. Feng's comment on grid parity, what kind of incentives are necessary, and what are my concerns about subsidies that are illegal? In terms of incentives that are necessary, because of the global subsidization of traditional forms of energy, we're looking at incentives for forms of clean energy that take the cost of clean energy down to the level of incentivized and subsidized traditional energy in order to compete. So that at one point, solar energy, for example, will have no incentives and will be cost competitive with subsidized fossil fuels. That is the challenge today. And at that point, it may be the appropriate time to discuss in greater depth not how will we do better R&D, make better products, and build better energy production systems with clean tech, but then we can look at why are technologies that are 100 years old still being subsidized today by taxpayers. That's a different question. Secondly, concerns about subsidies that are illegal. There is a lot of discussion today in the press and policy circles about the Chinese government providing illegal subsidies to clean technology. We could also ask the question, are loan guarantees in the US a form of illegal subsidy to incentivize clean tech that resulted, for example, in the fiasco surrounding Solyndra and the No More Solyndras Act? Was that an illegal subsidy? In Japan, interest rates on homes that install solar PV systems are several points lower than interest rates on mortgages for homes that don't have PV. Is that an illegal subsidy to industry, or is that a good incentive to drive consumer behavior? In Germany, there have been very strong incentives, particularly in the former eastern states, to drive the development of manufacturing facilities and to bring in good green jobs. So I would also ask the question, are those incentives illegal subsidies? There's a lot of government incentivization of clean energy. As I noted, more than 118 countries currently have incentives. So I think this is a question that must be resolved before anyone can believe groups that are levying claims that China is illegally and heavily subsidizing the clean energy industry. I'll leave it to those 2 questions, as I know many other panelists have responses to make, and I'm happy to speak with anyone else after.
Thank you, Judy. Chen, we go to you first and then come back.
我先说一下这个关于电网评价这个事情。刚才方博士说了一部分，我在想，就是将来这个 电网评价怎么定义，这个太阳能与传统能源竞争力怎么个判断，它如果是固定电价的话，这个可能相对容易简单判断一下，但是在将来能源市场必定是市场化的一个能源市场，这个可能还需要从这个整个项目的全生命周期以及那个将来的能源市场的具体情况那个价格，但是从那个测算来说，我们可以测算出什么样的投资成本，什么样的这个市场环境，比如发电小时数可以保证它。从这方面是可以算出来是没问题的。我们认为就是已经为期不远了，特别是在这个终端销售侧，的确是应该是时间不会太远，特别是在一些价格比较高的、电价比较高的一些领域国家啊。另外就是关于这个激励机制、这个补贴什么这方面的合法性，以及这个我们最需要什么样的政策。首先说一下，我想中国对新能源的扶持机制，现在主要还应该说是基本上全部体现在对这个电价补贴上，就是我们学习欧洲的经验，对风电、太阳能发电、生物质发电，这个上网的都是设定那个固定上网电价，要求电网公司按照这个价格来收购，其中高于煤电的价格由全民来分摊，可以认为是补贴吧，是由全民来分摊，每个电力消费者都会支付一定的一个电力附加来支持新能源的发展。其他方面的补贴，其实只有一些国家的一些投入和一些技术研发和设备产业化的一些投入和市场示范的补贴，但是这个规模应该是非常小的，大概也就是几亿人民币这几年吧。但是主要还是这个支持应用，支持应用的合法性，刚才大家讨论，实话，这个我觉得它的确跟那个整个能源这个领域的有关系。化石能源也显性的补贴和隐性的补贴，就是说外部性没有内部化，这也算是一种不公平的一种成为一种补贴吧。这个问题不解决，单纯的谈论新能源这个补贴，就是应用的补贴的合法性，有点没有抓住问题的根本，可能是所以说这个，我想在现阶段，在化石能源没有把它价格没有完全涵盖成本的时候，新能源这个应用的一些支持机制、激励机制是需要的，但是的确是需要使这些激励机制更加有效能支持那些最有效的技术、最有效的企业，这可能是我们的目的吧。然后还谈到这个，消除清洁技术的税，这个我想这个贸易政策，它有根据它自己的一些，我本身不是贸易专家，我对这个了解很少，但是我认为贸易政策它是有一定自己的一些准则和目的的，它是一方面可能还是希望能够鼓励这个产业发展吧，另一方面又要维护整个市场的环境，现在可能随着这个社会它社会价值也要增加了，就是说如果它是改善自然环境，那方面它有指导的，所以这贸易政策就是需要的。我想可能是的确是既有这些自身的原因，还有这个社会价值、社会判断的一些因素，决定我们应该采取什么样的贸易政策。关于清洁技术税本身，中国是近年来对这个是用这些税收政策是支持这个新清洁技术的应用的，不管是节能技术什么技术，对进口这方面的一些技术装备是减免税的。我想这个是政策的一个倾向性是很清楚的，但是这次问题是需要具体问题具体去分析，没有涉及的一个领域非常宏观的说，这个领域所有的技术都是完全减免税的，它也是有一些具体问题具体分析，根据这个实际的产业的需要、实际的节能减排工作的需要，来确定这个技术装备目录。 然后进行减免税的一些政策。另外还有一个问者提到说，中国这个加强一些宣传，的确是，中国我不知道是因为哪方面原因，也可能是中国这个企业家和政府都是主要的精力放在国内，这可能是中国的政治家这样说，要把自己的事情做好，然后就去埋头去做，然后在国际上一些宣传交流可能不够。比如说有些人认为中国给予企业新能源企业几百亿的这个贷款一些支持政策。其实刚才上午也提到，比如国开行它承诺多少贷款，其实也是一种意向性的，非常初步的意向性的，将来的贷款实际情况还要跟着具体项目走，并不是马上就成为这是中国的一种大规模的政府完全主导的金融扶持政策。证监会银监会他们主席也很明确说，在商言商，就是说每个金融企业对自己对新能源的一些融资，它也要符合这方面的一些政策，它也要符合他们商业化的银行的一些自身的一些经营利益。我想这方面一些情况还是可能国内的确是对外介绍的比较少一些。今天来的时候，会场上我们一些参会者带来一些英文的杂志，他们说国际上需要中国的人需要发出这样的声音，通过自己的渠道。我想的确是我们应该是加强一些对外的一些交流，不一定是带有意向导向性的宣传，但是把情况说清楚，我想这是非常必要的。我们与美国能源部进行这个对话，我们也把我们的情况做一个总结，也发给他，但是说可能是这个范围比较有限。我们与欧盟一些交流，也可能是也是局限于应对式的一些交流，没有一种媒体全社会的层面的一些交流，这可能是我们一些工作的缺陷吧。我想随着这个中国这个经济这个全球化进程吧，这个国际交流的层面宽度深度越来加深，我想这方面问题可以逐步得到解决。以后通过更通畅的对话也可能既消除一些误解，也可能是为我们找到一些更新的办法，会提供很好的帮助吧。
Thank you, Jiangsheng. Luca, you have to be very brief, please.
Okay, so with respect to the legal issue of the applicability of Article GATT 20, as you know, in the WTO legal system, you have the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade 1947, the GATT agreement, and then you have many other agreements. One of these is the agreement on subsidies. So there is one big issue of whether you can apply both. And this is the main issue here. You have a specific rules on subsidies, which do not have any particular legal exception, for example, for environmental purposes. And so some people have been suggesting, okay, let's fill this gap by applying one article that you find in the GATT agreement, GATT 20, which has an exception for environmental purposes. Here you have two questions. First, whether technical questions, you can apply GATT Article 20 to subsidies. And here, in my view, the arguments in favor and against are equally good. So, but it's a big issue because, as I said, it's the only possible justification that you have. Assuming that it could be applied, then you have a problem because you have to prove that your subsidy is necessary for environmental protection and does not include any discrimination. So just to give you an example, if you have a local content requirement, it would be very difficult to show that the local content requirement is necessary to protect the environment and does not discriminate. It's not impossible. It's fact specific, but it's very difficult. Very quickly to the point that the question that initially Ricardo made about fossil fuels. Of course, that's a very important point, and also other comments have been made on this. This is the other side of the coin. We talk a lot about support to renewable energy because there is a handicapped with respect to the heavy subsidization to fossil fuel. Legally, can we do something in a creative way? But I gather that nothing has been discussed practically on these. Somebody has been suggesting, Rob House of New York University has been suggesting that possibly you could think about fossil, if you consider renewable energy as an environmental good and service, you could consider fossil fuel subsidies as a non-tariff barrier to them. And so they could be included in that kind of negotiation. But again, as far as I know, it's just an academic argument. In 2 seconds, final point about the legal definitions. True, feed-in tariffs under European stated law are not a state aid, but the rules in the WTO are different, and we still do not know. Ricardo mentioned that there are 2 important cases pending concerning Canada, and in particular a feed-in tariff of Ontario. And in a few weeks, hopefully, or in a couple of months, we will have an answer, hopefully, by the panel, eventually, of whether a feed-in tariff is a subsidy or not. But this is, as Ricardo said, is a special measure because there is, again, a local content requirement. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Luca. And with this, I'd like to thank really all the panelists. You've done a wonderful job and on a subject that is terribly complex, and we usually take a few days to discuss. So thank you for being good at keeping it brief. And thank you all for bearing with us, and apologies for being a bit delayed. I think we would delay the whole thing for about 30 minutes, eating up on, as I said, on the cocktail. So that we don't take time from the next session, which is a fascinating session based on the research project led by Professor Scott Kennedy. I think I haven't heard from the people that give me orders, but I guess that we go out into a coffee break and come back, right? Do we have a coffee break? Yes, we do. Okay. So we have a coffee break, and about, I guess it should be 15 minutes, and we should be back at 30 if it's possible. If we can do it in 10 minutes, that would be great. We'll call you in. Thank you all very much.